All right, let's dive right in and open a true mystery box today, folks. In this explainer, we are unpacking the only unsolved ear piracy case in all of commercial aviation history. It is a story that starts with a completely ordinary-looking man buying a simple one-way ticket, and it ends in an absolute enigma that has kept the FBI scratching their heads for over 50 years. $200,000. To put that into perspective, our sources note that factoring in inflation, that's equivalent to roughly 1.6 crore rupees today, a truly staggering stake. And this was the ransom demanded by a perfectly calm, suit-wearing passenger on the afternoon of November 24th, 1971. He didn't yell, he didn't panic, he just sat there, ordered a bourbon, lit a cigarette, and initiated an absolute masterclass in hijacking. Which brings us to the ultimate question at the heart of our explainer today. How does a hijacker just vanish into thin air? We're going to walk through the meticulous execution of his plan, the incredibly baffling clues he left behind, and the maddening question of how a man disappeared from a freezing sky with a literal fortune. Now, things escalated terrifyingly fast on Northwest Airlines Flight 305. He boards at 2:50 p.m. in Portland. Barely 10 minutes later, he passes a note to the flight attendant. By 5:45 p.m., they're landing in Seattle to collect the cash, and less than 2 hours after that, they are right back in the air. This completely routine 30-minute hopper flight transformed into a chilling hostage situation. And the craziest part? The other 36 passengers just sat there, totally unaware, thinking they were just dealing with a mechanical delay. You have to imagine the sheer terror for the crew when flight attendant Florence Schaffner finally opened that envelope. The note simply read, "I have a bomb." And just to prove he wasn't bluffing, he calmly cracked open his briefcase to reveal a terrifying, unmistakable setup of red cylinders and wires. Again, no shouting, no frenzy, just a quiet, incredibly terrifying threat. What's absolutely wild here is the precision of his demands. He didn't just ask for a giant bag of cash. He wanted exactly $200,000 in $20 bills, specifically 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting and ready on the tarmac in Seattle. This highly specific grocery list forced the FBI to scramble madly, leaving the plane circling in a holding pattern for an hour and a half just to gather all the gear. So once he actually had the money and let the passengers go, he issued his flight demands for Mexico. And this is where his highly specialized knowledge really shines through. He told them to fly below 10,000 feet, keep the landing gear down, set the flaps to exactly 15 degrees, and, crucially, keep those aft stairs open. He intimately knew the unique capabilities of the Boeing 727. In fact, this exact model was historically used by the CIA for covert drops in Vietnam, specifically because of that rear staircase. He knew exactly what this bird could do. Realizing they'd never actually make it to Mexico City burning fuel like that, they agreed to a pit stop in Reno, Nevada. At 8:05 p.m., the crew offered him help over the intercom, and his response was just a cold, simple no. Minutes later, they felt a sudden pressure bump in the cabin. That meant only one thing. The hijacker had deployed the aft stairs and jumped out into pitch black, freezing rain over a rugged, unforgiving forest known as Victor 23. When that plane safely touched down in Reno, authorities absolutely swarmed it, expecting a massive crime scene. But instead, they were met with this incredibly sparse collection of clues: a black clip-on tie, 8 cigarette butts, and 2 of the 4 parachutes. That was literally it. The man, the briefcase bomb, and the money were entirely gone. Okay, let's take a quick detour here to bust a massive pop culture myth. The name D.B. Cooper is actually completely made up. The ticket was purchased under the name Dan Cooper, but in the frantic media frenzy right after the hijacking, a rushed reporter confused our guy with a totally innocent suspect. The FBI quickly cleared that other guy, but the media just ran with D.B. Cooper, permanently cementing his legendary status under a completely fabricated name. Now, a massive point of deduction for investigators is the gear he actually chose to use. The FBI had provided 2 main parachutes and 2 reserves, but one of the reserves was a dummy training chute that a skydiving school had accidentally thrown in. Bizarrely, Cooper chose an older, non-steerable military parachute and the dummy training chute. He completely ignored the vastly superior, brand-new civilian equipment. So you have to wonder, was he just an amateur making a fatal mistake? Or was he a former military paratrooper instinctively grabbing the vintage gear he trusted most? After that night, the trail went ice cold. The FBI scoured those rugged mountains and combed through dense forests, finding absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. Until nearly a decade later in 1980. A young boy named Brian Ingram was digging a campfire pit on a sandy Washington River beach called Tina Bar, and his shovel hit something solid. It was a stunning discovery. Rotting stacks of cash, literally buried right there in the sand. The boy pulled out exactly $5,880 in heavily deteriorating $20 bills. When his parents handed it over, the FBI frantically cross-referenced their master list, and boom, the serial numbers were a perfect match for the ransom money handed to Cooper back in Seattle. Finally, after 9 long years, they had a physical trace. But hold on, because this is where the physical evidence throws a massive wrench into everything. Tests show that the rubber bands binding those specific bundles of cash shouldn't have been intact. Rubber bands exposed to the elements naturally snap and decay after about 1 year. Yet these somehow survived 9 years? Plus, dredging operations at Tina Bar in 1974 had pulled sand from the river bottom onto the beach, and the money was found above that dredged sand layer. What does that mean? It strongly suggests the cash wasn't washed up, it was manually placed there years after the jump in 1971. Which leads us to a huge divergence in the investigation. Did he actually survive that drop? I mean, if he died, did the money somehow miraculously wash ashore through impossible river currents against the natural flow of the water? Or does the survival of those rubber bands mean that Cooper somehow survived that deadly freezing plunge, walked away, and then quietly came back years later to bury some of the stash himself? Over 50 years, the FBI has looked at literally thousands of people, but 2 prime suspects really jump out. First, you've got Robert Rackstraw, an Army paratrooper and explosives expert who had a history of criminal audacity. When the media flat out asked if he was D.B. Cooper, the guy literally smiled and said, "I could have been." Then there's Kenneth Christensen, a World War II paratrooper and airline mechanic. He perfectly matched the physical description of the hijacker, and crucially, he was left-handed, exactly like the man who handled the briefcase and the tie clip on the plane. And the case for Christensen gets even more chilling. Fast forward to 1994, he gave a cryptic deathbed confession to his brother, uttering this exact phrase, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you." Wow. It felt like the absolute truth was right there on his lips, hovering before being buried forever. Was he the man in the suit? Without hard physical proof, we might never be 100% sure. And you know why we might never be sure? Because of a truly staggering loss of evidence. It's infuriating, honestly. Those 8 cigarette butts left on the plane, lost. Just gone, somewhere in the FBI archives. Our one and only real shot at a definitive DNA profile was completely destroyed. Add to that, the suspect sketches never perfectly matched anyone, and many aviation experts argue that the sheer weight and bulk of $200,000 strapped to a man plummeting through freezing rain made his survival incredibly unlikely in the first place. So after decades of chasing ghosts, agonizing over half-clues, and analyzing deathbed confessions, the FBI made a massive announcement. In 2016, they officially closed the D.B. Cooper file. They redirected their resources, openly admitting that without new, groundbreaking physical evidence, solving this aviation enigma is now, for all intents and purposes, nearly impossible. Ultimately, as we wrap up this explainer, we are left with one final provocative thought. Was that Tina Bar money washed up by the forces of nature? Or was it buried there by a survivor? Did a brilliant criminal mastermind execute the absolute perfect midair escape and walk away into the shadows? Or did that dark, freezing night sky claim the life of the man calling himself Dan Cooper, leaving behind nothing but a few rotting dollar bills to taunt us forever? What do you think happened? Let that sink in and keep questioning the impossible.